I didn't notice when he transformed into an adult. And now we are concealed authentic forbidden romance narratives. I have always held the belief that love, in its most genuine essence, is intended to be uncomplicated. A mother's affection. Simple, steadfast, definitive. As I stood in the softly illuminated bathroom that night, observing my son Brooklyn fight to keep his eyes open, an unexpected feeling washed over me. Not fear, not guilt, but an emotion that runs deeper, something weightier. The burden of being the sole individual in his existence capable of genuinely catching him during his moments of dissent. Brooklyn leaned wearily against the sink. His fingers clutched the edge as if the world below him had shifted just a fraction off kilter. The aroma of whiskey and citrus enveloped him, intertwined with the slightest hint of his cologne. A gift I had chosen for him last Christmas. He had consistently demonstrated a sense of responsibility, never indulging in recklessness, never resembling those boys who staggered home intoxicated, crashing through the front door like some of his peers did. Tonight felt distinct. "I can do it," he murmured, his voice heavy and slow as he attempted to turn on the faucet. His fingers fumbled over the handles, and I could see the crease of frustration form between his brows. He had always been so independent, even as a child, insisting on tying his own shoes, pouring his own milk, refusing my help even when he needed it. I stepped forward and reached for the faucet myself, twisting the cold handle. The water splashed against the porcelain, swirling down the drain. "Brooklyn, just let me help." He let out a deep breath, his resolve beginning to wane. I noticed it in the way his shoulders sagged, the way his hold on the sink relaxed. He despised this, feeling exposed, being observed in such a way. Yet he placed his trust in me. He had always placed his trust in me. I retrieved a fresh washcloth from the shelf and let it run under the water, wringing it out before softly pressing it against his forehead. His skin felt warm, a flush from the alcohol. And as I leaned in to wipe the sweat from his brow, his eyes gently closed. "You shouldn't have waited up," he murmured. His voice was softer now, almost youthful in its weariness. The one who held my hand too tightly on his first day of school, the one who used to tell me everything before the world taught him that some things were better kept to himself. I glided the damp cloth across his cheeks, tracing his jawline, and the stubble he was still acclimating to after shaving. His hair clung to his forehead, damp with sweat, with strands curling at his temples. "I didn't mean to drink that much," he admitted, his voice thick with something that wasn't quite regret, but something close. "I know. I'm at a loss. I suppose I wished to escape it all for a brief moment." I paused, my hand coming to a halt for just a second. "Forget what?" He let out a slow breath, eyes still closed. "Everything." Brooklyn wasn't the kind of boy who ran from his problems. He stood firm against them, the one who maintained cohesion, the one who prioritized the needs of others above his own. But tonight he had released his grip. Tonight, he had permitted himself to descend. I glided the damp cloth along his neck, tracing the steady pulse that throbbed beneath his skin. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to," I said gently. His lips parted as if he was going to say something, but he only shook his head. I didn't press him. Instead, I turned off the faucet and set the cloth aside, reaching for the towel hanging by the door. "Come on," I said softly. "Let's get you to bed." He didn't argue. That's how I knew he was more exhausted than he let on. Brooklyn never let anyone take care of him. But tonight, just this once, he did. I slid an arm around his back, guiding him toward his room. He leaned into me, his weight heavy against my side, and for the first time in years, I felt just how much he had grown. He wasn't a child anymore. He was taller than me now, broader, stronger. But in this moment, he was still mine. We arrived at his bed, and he nearly fell onto the mattress with a deep sigh. I covered him with the blanket, smoothing it out just as I did when he was little. His fingers wrapped around my wrist. "Stay," he murmured. My heart tightened. For a brief moment I paused. Not out of reluctance, but due to the softness and uncertainty in his voice, which revealed the depth of what he had been concealing. I settled next to him, my hand gently placed over his. "I'm here," I said. And I would always be. Even when he didn't inquire. Even when he feigned indifference to my presence. Even when the world insisted he should stand alone. For that was the essence of love. Not merely the simple moments. Not solely the times of joy and accomplishment. Love was this. Silent instances, the weighty ones. The night lingered in shadows, a quiet vigil for the storm to fade away. Brooklyn's breathing became more measured. His hold on my wrist began to fade as slumber enveloped him. I lingered a bit longer, keeping watch over him just as I always had. As I typically do. I never intended to drift off next to Brooklyn. The fatigue had silently approached me, just as it always seemed to do. Quiet yet persistent. It crept under my skin until my body could no longer dismiss it. I sat on the edge of his bed, keeping a watchful eye on him as I had done in his childhood. Ensuring he wouldn't wake in the night feeling unwell from too many cocktails. Yet, the warmth of the room, the steady sound of his breathing, and the weight of everything I had been carrying pressed down on me until my body simply surrendered. Upon waking, the initial sensation that enveloped me was one of warmth. The morning lacked its usual chill, the kind that lingered in the corners of the house, and the distant coldness from the far side of my bed where Adam lay, just out of reach, a world away. This felt unique, more intimate. The next sensation I experienced was heaviness. Brooklyn's arm draped over me. His body was pressed against mine. As though he had instinctively found me in his dreams. His grip was steady yet relaxed, as if he had performed this countless times in the past. As if it were the most effortless occurrence imaginable. For a brief instant, I remained still. My mind, still fogged by sleep, wrestled to identify this sensation, this intimacy, this solace. It felt like an eternity since I had awakened to someone embracing me in such a way. Perhaps years. Adam had long since ceased to reach for me in the night. No longer draping an arm over my waist as he once did, when we were newly married. I had come to accept it. With a serene distance growing between us that expanded endlessly until it resembled a vast sea. Yet, in this moment, I found myself not alone. Brooklyn stirred, his breath warm against my shoulder. And then gently. "Hello, Mom." His voice carried a heaviness of slumber, yet there lingered an additional quality within it. Soft, serene, and fulfilling. "I enjoyed a lovely evening with you." My heart tightened. It was a straightforward statement, yet it carried significant meaning. I let out a slow breath, feeling uncertain about how to reply. His form remained weighty against me, filtering through the early morning light that seeped in through the curtains. I gently maneuvered, slipping out from beneath his arm, and positioned myself on the edge of the bed. "I'm relieved," I said at last, my voice gentle. Brooklyn stretched, his movements deliberate and unhurried. A relaxed smile playing at the edges of his lips. He appeared unbothered and took his time to clarify his situation. He simply appeared content. At ease in a manner I hadn't witnessed in ages. As I exited his room and gently closed the door, an unsettling sensation lingered within me, suggesting that a change had occurred between us. Later that morning, after breakfast, Brooklyn and I headed to the grocery store. It was an activity we had shared for years, a routine that began when he was just a child. Our simple routine. In his younger days, he would sit in the shopping cart, animatedly talking about superheroes and soccer practice as I filled our basket with fresh produce and cereal boxes. As he aged, he continued to enjoy tagging along, selecting his favorite snacks. Brooklyn displayed an uncommon level of attentiveness. He kept stealing glances in my direction. His gaze lingered longer than usual, as if he were examining me closely. Initially, I overlooked it. However, he began to express his thoughts. "You look lovely today, Mom." I blinked, taken by surprise. It was not uncommon for Brooklyn to exhibit a certain sweetness. He was always considerate. The sort of boy who could tell when I was weary, the kind who recalled my birthday without any prompts. However, this was distinct. I chuckled softly, dismissing it with a wave. "Oh, come on. I just tossed this on." He tilted his head, deep in thought. "No, I truly mean it. You consistently present yourself well." There was something in his tone that caused a knot to form in my stomach. Not in a negative sense, just surprising. I occupied myself with selecting a carton of eggs, urging my pulse to calm down. A moment later, Brooklyn spoke once more. "Hey, Mom. Do you sometimes sense that? I'm uncertain. As if you aren't already the center of attention." I glanced at him, taken aback. "What is happening?" He shrugged, his expression a mystery. "I simply intend to convey. You take care of everything for everyone. You look after me, you look after Adam, but who looks after you?" His words struck me more profoundly than I anticipated. I parted my lips, only to seal them once more, caught in a moment of uncertainty about how to express myself. Because the reality was, he was correct. I was overlooked. Not any longer. There are no moments of laughter shared between us anymore. We inhabited the same dwelling, yet we were worlds away. I gulped. That's simply a facet of motherhood. Brooklyn scowled. Brooklyn discovered little gestures that made me feel acknowledged. He extended his hand toward the items on the upper shelves even before I had the chance to inquire. He bore the bags with unwavering resolve. He praised my selections, saying I had excellent taste. And I allowed him to proceed. Even though a part of me felt odd accepting it, another part. An unspoken weight hanging in the air. Among us. For the first time in ages, I felt genuinely seen by someone. The day unfolded seamlessly, reminiscent of a time when life was uncomplicated. When love flowed naturally and laughter was abundant. Brooklyn and I spent the afternoon in the kitchen, seamlessly navigating around each other with a graceful flow. We diced the vegetables for the stew, debated the appropriate amount of seasoning to include, and sampled more than we likely ought to have. At one point, he flicked a bit of flour at me. And I gasped in mock horror before retaliating with a handful of diced onions. The entire kitchen was infused with the aromas of garlic, rosemary, and slow-cooked comfort, yet above all. Yet it held the promise of a cooler night to come. The backyard lay in serene stillness, punctuated only by the occasional crackle of barbecue flames, and the distant chorus of cicadas. Brooklyn rested on the wooden steps that led to the yard, idly rolling a beer bottle between his palms. "You know, we should do this more often," he said. I glanced up from arranging the table. "What should I do?" "Share moments together. Only we." His words carried a simplicity and sincerity that made me smile effortlessly. I acknowledged that I would enjoy that. Adam was absent from our gathering. He returned home late, muttering something under his breath. He was utterly drained and withdrew to his study, neglecting to even recognize the meal we had prepared. I found it predictable. For the first time in ages, I refused to let his indifference spoil my evening. Brooklyn observed, naturally. He consistently observed. After dinner, we stayed outside a bit longer, chatting about everything and nothing at all. He shared with me the gatherings he had been attending. He paid attention to me as well. As the night deepened and the air turned crisp, we retreated indoors. Though the hour was late, neither of us felt prepared to let the day slip away. "Why don't you come chill in my room?" Brooklyn proposed, suppressing a yawn. As we once did. There was an almost nostalgic quality to his words. It still carried a subtle scent of aged cologne, mingling with the remnants of books he had never fully immersed himself in. Posters adorned the walls. Remnants from his high school days, a collage of bands and movie quotes that had once shaped his identity, now appearing as echoes of a bygone era. He collapsed onto the bed with a sigh. Arms crossed behind his head. Sometimes, I lose sight of how pleasant it is to simply exist in this moment. I perched on the edge of the mattress, carefully smoothing out a wrinkle in the blanket. You come to understand that some of your most cherished moments unfolded right here, in the stillness, when you weren't hurrying towards something else. His words lingered in the air. Weighty yet reassuring. I understand what you're saying, I replied gently. I experience that feeling sometimes as well. Brooklyn turned his head to gaze upon me. His expression was a mystery. Glancing at my hands, I confessed that I was uncertain. At times, I ponder that I've simply acclimated to the sensation of feeling unseen. Brooklyn sat up at that, leaning forward. You are not unseen, Mom. I smiled, yet it lacked the warmth that usually sparkles in my eyes. As you age, things take on a new perspective. People cease to regard you in the same manner. They cease to observe the small details. It's not that Adam is a bad person, he's simply absent. Not suitable for my taste. Brooklyn scowled. That isn't just. You are worthy of so much more. I shook my head. It's not about fairness, darling. At times, individuals simply drift away from one another. The silence lingered between us for a moment before Brooklyn spoke once more. He suddenly said, You used to give me massages when I was a kid. Do you recall? I released a gentle laugh. Absolutely, I do. You would often express dissatisfaction with how I didn't apply enough pressure. He smiled broadly. I was quite the theatrical child. That's certainly a perspective. I playfully rolled my eyes. Standard fare. I reached out, placing my hands on his shoulders, and gradually started to work the tension out of his muscles. He exhaled slowly, his head bowing down. Wow, that feels amazing. Grinned. You're as wound up as your father once was. Brooklyn sneered. However, he lacks any justification. I'm feeling youthful yet overwhelmed. He is simply. He interrupted himself, shaking his head in disbelief. Forget it. I did not push. Instead, I concentrated on the task before me, allowing my fingers to navigate the knots in his shoulders, gliding down his back. This small act of care was, in a way, quite comforting. It brought back memories of his younger days, when he would climb onto the couch and rest his head in my lap, seeking comfort as I played with his hair after a long day. There existed an essence of the divine, concerning connection, regarding the act of being there for someone in a manner that language may not fully convey. I sensed Brooklyn unwind under my touch, the stress dissipating effortlessly. Thank you, Mom. He whispered softly. Forever, I murmured. We remained in that position for an extended period in the calm. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt seen. Felt acknowledged. Experienced affection. It felt as though I had significance. I arose before the dawn broke. The house lay in silence, enveloped in the profound blue of dawn. For a moment, I lingered in bed, attuned to the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the steady beat of the clocks ticking on the wall. Adam's side of the bed lay cold, untouched. I can't recall the last occasion when we both drifted off to sleep simultaneously, much less when we reached for each other. Another in the shadow. I lay on my side, gazing up at the ceiling. Brooklyn mentioned something to me last night that I couldn't get out of my mind. You are worthy of so much more. The words stayed with me long after I exited his room. Long after I stood before the bathroom mirror, gazing at my reflection as if I were encountering myself for the first time in years. Did I merit something greater? Or had I merely become accustomed to the void? The silent apathy of a spouse who had ceased to notice me. Had my desires, my necessities, been diminished to mere afterthoughts? The solitude I had persuaded myself was merely an inevitable aspect of aging. I sat up, releasing a slow breath. There was a time when I felt desired. A moment when affection transcended the mundane, becoming a vibrant and heartfelt experience. Recently, I had sensed hints of that once more. Not from Adam, but from the one individual who had always been aware of my presence. Brooklyn. Later that morning, Brooklyn discovered me in the kitchen, gazing out the window with a cup of coffee cradled in my hands. "Are you all right?" he inquired, resting against the counter. I smiled. Even if it felt insignificant. Indeed. Merely contemplating. Concerning what? I paused for a moment, then shook my head. Nothing significant. Brooklyn examined me for an arm. Come on. Let's create something today. Only we. I lifted an eyebrow. What are you thinking about? Something enjoyable, he remarked, showcasing that youthful smile of his. A distraction that will pull you away from your thoughts for a little while. I released a gentle chuckle. That's quite a challenge. We'll see how that unfolds. And just like that, my morning changed completely. We ventured out to the farmer's market on the outskirts of town, where the air was filled with the aroma of fresh bread and ripe peaches. Brooklyn strolled alongside me, hands tucked into his pockets, occasionally extending his arm to pluck an apple or a bunch of herbs, lifting them as though he were evaluating a work of art. How about this one? He inquired, raising an enormous zucchini. Excessively forceful. I let out a snort. Extremely forceful. That's a bold assertion, indeed. He smiled broadly. I prefer my vegetables to have a distinct character. A basket was filled with all the essentials for our dinner. A blend of vibrant vegetables, choice cuts of meat from the butcher's stall, and a loaf of sourdough so exquisite it seemed almost sinful to cut into it. As we packed everything into the car, Brooklyn shot a glance my way. You seem to be in good spirits. I blinked, taken by surprise. What is happening? He said simply. You seem quite cheerful today. I parted my lips to reply, yet realized I was at a loss for words. Because he was correct. I felt a sense of happiness. It had been quite a while since I experienced that feeling. Once again, we found ourselves in the kitchen, creating culinary delights side by side. The kitchen resonated with joy, the rhythmic clanging of pots, the delightful hiss of butter meeting the hot skillet. Brooklyn glided effortlessly around me, grabbing items before I even had a chance to request them, playfully nudging my shoulder as he stirred the stew. Adam was home, yet he seemed to drift in and out of reality. He strode through the kitchen briefly, murmuring something regarding paperwork, and vanished into his office without even acknowledging the meal we were preparing. Brooklyn witnessed it. He remained silent, yet I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched the wooden spoon with an intensity that felt excessive. He doesn't even inquire. Brooklyn whispered to himself as he dried his hands on a kitchen towel. I gazed at him. What do you want to know? How was your day? He asked plainly. Your current emotional state. I glanced back at the pot on the stove, stirring it absent-mindedly. That's simply the way it is. That doesn't imply it's acceptable. I tightened my grip on the spoon. I understand. The atmosphere surrounding us transformed. Something unspoken lingered in the air, dense and weighty, yet neither of us dared to address it. Instead, Brooklyn retrieved the plates from the cabinet, arranging the table with a calm resolve. We dined al fresco that evening, just the two of us. The sky donned a rich hue of violet, while the air embraced a warm yet pleasant ambience. Brooklyn filled a glass with wine for me, despite my not having requested it. We savored our meal, engaging in conversation about everything and nothing. It felt as though I had been burdened by a weight for such an extended period that the sensation of release had slipped from my memory. Following dinner, we found ourselves back in Brooklyn's room once more. It was turning into a routine. Those late-night conversations, the hushed moments when we lower our defenses in ways we never do in the daylight. He perched on the edge of the bed, arms draped over his knees, observing me with a contemplative look. "Have you ever pondered what brings you joy?" he inquired. I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" "Well, aside from being a mother. Beyond being Adam's wife. Only you." He paused. It was a straightforward question, yet it seemed utterly unanswerable. When was the last time that thought crossed my mind? Finally, I confessed, "I don't know." Brooklyn appeared unfazed. "You ought to." I exhaled softly, my gaze fixed on my hands. Perhaps I have lost sight of my identity beyond those aspects of myself. Brooklyn extended a hand, gently placing it over mine. The warmth lingered, unwavering and constant. "Perhaps it's time to discover the truth." I gazed up at him, a sensation in my chest constricting. He truly meant it. He truly intended it. For the first time in ages, I sensed that someone was truly seeing me, not merely as a mother, a wife, or a figure lingering in the periphery of their life. Brooklyn witnessed my presence. The authentic version of myself. Perhaps that marked the initial move toward rediscovering who I truly am. After that, everything was all right. We overlooked everything. We melted into the world as if we were two souls who effortlessly grasped each other's essence without the need for speech. Similar to those who desire nothing beyond each other's company.